All right, guys, so we're going to go ahead and put it all together. So you've already learned what the slope is, and you've already learned what the y-intercept is. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a common formula or common equation that all of the equations that you've looked at today are already in, and kind of isolate what that m and what that b is and where they are in the equation. So it says the equation of a line can be written in slope-intercept form. So this right here is slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. You will remember it. You will hear it again and again and again. So slope-intercept form is always y equals mx plus b. So like on the last page, we had different graphs that were that had a slope and that had a y-intercept. So now we're going to be able to use that slope and y-intercept and put it into the actual equation. So we'll go ahead and label that that m again. That arrow is pointing to our m. The m is the slope. So remember, the slope is the m. Okay. And if we think back to our vocabulary, that m is the coefficient. Now we have y equals mx. Again, the x and the y are just numbers on the graph or coordinate plane, or on the coordinate plane. And plus b. B is your y-intercept, which we already discussed. So wherever that y-intercept is where it will cross that y-axis at. So all y-intercepts ordered pairs are 0, and then whatever number it crosses the y-axis at. And if we think back to our vocabulary, that is the constant. All right, so here we go. The equation y equals 4x minus 9. So they want you to identify the slope and the y-intercept. So that number that's right in front of the x, the coefficient for the x is 4. My slope is 4. I could also say 4 over 1. That means that I am rising 4 on my graph. I'm rising 4. You don't need to draw this. And I'm running 1. Rising 4, running 1. So there's my slope, and my y-intercept is the number after where the plus b is, so minus 9. We need to include that negative in front of it. My y-intercept is negative 9. So it crosses the y-axis at negative 9. Let's look at the next one. Y equals negative 3x plus 6. So the number in front of the x is always my slope. So my slope is the negative 3. And we also, if we want to write that in fraction form so we know what our rise is and what our run is we're rising negative 3, so we're going down 3, and our run is 1, so we're going 1 to the right. Down 3, 1 to the right, down 3, 1 to the right, every time between 2 points on the graph. But when we first go to graph this, we want to know what that y-intercept is. The y-intercept is the constant at the end, so 6 would be my y-intercept. Looking at slope for y equals half x plus 8. Number in front of x is half. My slope is half. It is rising 1, running 2, going up 1 over 2 every time between 2 points. My y-intercept is the constant, positive 8, or just 8. Looking at the next one, y equals 3/4. There should be an x there, so you can add on that x. That is my fault. So we have negative 3/4 x. So the slope is still a fraction, so we have negative 3 over 4. It's still the number in front of the x. So we're rising, going down 3, going over 4. Down 3 over 4 every time for negative 3 over 4 for my slope. And because there's no number written there, it's basically like plus 0. So that means my y-intercept is 0. It crosses at the axis at the origin. It's 0, 0. So if you don't see anything behind the like y equals something x, that just means that there's no b, there's no y-intercept. Looking at the next one, y equals 1x plus 5. Look for the number in front of the x. The coefficient is 1. So my slope is a positive 1. We're adding the constant of 5 behind it. Next one, y equals x plus 3. Again, this means the same thing as the one directly above it. How many x's are there? There's 1. So make sure you don't say that your slope is 0. If there's no number in front of it, it just means your slope is 1. And again, for both of these, we want to make sure that we're rising 1 and running 1. So for both, we can write them in fraction form. Rising 1, running 1. Rising 1, running 1. And then y-intercept, where it crosses the y-axis, is at 3. So if I were to graph that right away, I know that it would cross the x-axis right about here at positive 3. Or y-axis, excuse me. And lastly, y equals 2x minus 1. Your slope right in front there, coefficient, 2. We could also say that's 2 over 1. Remember, that means I'm rising 2, going up 2, and going to the right or running 1. And be careful here, we have a negative 1, so that means it's my y-intercept is below the x-axis right here at negative 1. Okay. So what you're going to do is we're going to look at some of these graphs and determine the slope and the y-intercept. So usually it's easier to find the y-intercept first because it's where it crosses the y-axis. So I want you to take a look at the graph. We know that the y-axis is the vertical axis, and look at where it crosses. It crosses right here. So my y-intercept right here would be negative 2. Now the slope is a little bit harder, but not much harder. We're going to do the counting like we did on the last notes. So we're going to look for 2 points where it crosses a point. So we got 1 here, and then obviously the y-intercept. So we'll start counting at the y-intercept, and we'll do our 1, rise 1. I'm going to go ahead and put that in my fraction on top. And we're moving over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my run is 5. My slope would be 1/5. If I wanted to put that into fraction form, I would have y equals, remember slope is y equals mx plus b, so we want to have that 1/5 first. Y equals 1/5 x. So that's my m. I should just write m. Mx plus b. So we have 1/5 x plus my y-intercept is negative 2. So then it would be in y-intercept form. Let's take a look at number 2. Let's find our y-intercept first. Y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis, so that point would be 0, 1. So my y-intercept is the y value, the 1. Now let's see where we have some points. It looks like it crosses at every consecutive intersection. So if I am looking at my rise, I'm going down to meet this line 1. Remember, that would be a negative 1 because I'm going down. So my numerator, my rise, would be negative 1, but I'm going over to the right, which is positive 1. And again, if we think about this logically, this is a negative, it's going downhill, so it has to be a negative slope. So then we'd say, well, negative 1 over 1 simplifies to negative 1. So my slope is a negative 1, or a negative x, plus the y-intercept of 1. If you have a question on that, just raise your hand. Number 3, look at the equation below to determine the slope and the y-intercept. So we have y equals 3x. We know our slope is the coefficient. Remember, y equals mx plus b, that slope is the m. So my slope would be 3. If there is no plus b, no plus a number, what's your y-intercept? Your y-intercept would be 0. And 4, look at the equation below, determine the slope and the y-intercept. Y equals mx plus b, well, in spot of the m, where my slope should be, is 2/3. So my rise is 2, my run is 3, my slope is 2/3. And looking for the y-intercept, make sure you are including that negative in front of the 4 because it's part of the constant. So your y-intercept is crossing the y-axis at negative 4. So it's underneath the x-axis, right down here. Okay, so go ahead and flip the page, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 problems to do on the back trying to write in slope-intercept form. Awesome job. Let me know if you need help.